Hi, all. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is kind of exciting for us because a year ago we sat here at News Story and talked about a new partnership that we had just started with West Virginia Public Broadcasting and the Center for Rural Strategies, the Daily Yonder. And at that point, we were pretty well down a path of, we knew we wanted to launch some kind of publication that for us was going to be an experiment in a national audience, not a regional audience or a local audience. And so we were very busy planning that, excited to launch it, and then the election happened. And the next day, Dean Reed and I met and said, we have to cover this, because suddenly everybody's explanation, analysis, hand-wringing was around this rural-urban divide, and we felt like that, and also that we had seen Appalachia repeatedly referenced for an entire campaign. I'm sure every coal miner that there is to be interviewed in West Virginia has already been interviewed. And it was frustrating because the premise of the original publication we wanted to do was to stop being the subject of stories and to be the creators of stories. So this gave us, we felt like, a perfect opportunity to do that. And so we launched what at the time we thought would be a pop-up. And we intended to just cover the first 100 days of the Trump administration through the prism of Appalachia, and we grew an audience so quickly, and the national and international audience that we were targeting, that we decided to continue. So, and here I'm taking my bracelet off so I don't keep clanking on the mic. So I'm just going to share some of the highlights of what we did, but also the struggles of it. I mean, we were a legitimate startup news publication with a very small staff, only one of which was working full-time, Dave Mistich, who we had hired to be our digital managing editor. And I just want to mention a couple folks, too. Gina Dahlia, who already has like 3 other full-time jobs and took this on as general manager. Jesse Wright, who has a full-time job at West Virginia Public Broadcasting, but who has been neck-deep in this with us. And we just hired 2 new contributing editors, Lindsay Gilpin and Mason Adams. And I want you to take a good look at them, because I know there are writers, photographers, videographers, thank you, in this room who we want you to work with us to produce content, and we pay. We are investing in journalism. We're investing in the voices of this region. So I would love it if you would introduce yourself to this team so that they can work with you. So I was just going to share a little bit. Now we're talking about, well, we're going to cover this administration and this political climate 100 days at a time. And and every day counts, as we are all discovering. And we have not lost, we haven't lost momentum, we've gained momentum. So I'm just going to go in here. Why can't I get this? Okay, so what I wanted to talk about as far as some of the trials that we have dealt with is really about the challenge of a product that is trying to build a national and an international audience. And we made a very deliberate decision to do that, because you really are, I mean, obviously talking to different sets of people. A month ago, we had a workshop here that talked about audience engagement, and one of the journalists in the room, one of the presenters said, how do you define journalism? And he said, we take national content and we make it local. And that's what all of us have learned in journalism schools, and that's what you do. And I thought, well, we're doing journalism wrong. We're taking local content and regional content and making it make sense for a national audience. Fortunately, we have the prism not just of what's happened in the election, but every issue that has bubbled to the surface of the election is an Appalachian issue. And one of our favorite pieces that we ran was this one, where it talked about these are not just Appalachian issues, these are national issues. And that gives us some authority to really narrate that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that process of nationalizing content. And one of our contributing editors is Thomas McBee, who is the senior editor and the growth director at Quartz, which, if you don't know that publication, they're a really, really cool publication, also a startup, and also incredibly generous with their time and talent in helping us grow this. And Thomas McBee. No, the name of the Quartz. And it's QZ.com. They're an experimental outlet, but they came actually and visited us about 4 years ago when we were at the very beginning of talking about we wanted to have a publication that we could incubate in our program. And they were doing something similar in the sense that they were starting a business publication, but for an audience that wasn't a business audience. So it was the same thing. How do you take content that means something to one person and make it meaningful for a much wider audience? And this is just a snapshot of, we already know, we're sitting here in this room, we know that we have been the subject of much narration by The Guardian, CNN, BBC, Atlantic. I mean, every day I'm pulling a new story down where they're talking about us or talking, again, to a coal miner. So we talked about that being a process of listening to the internet. So we have to take content that matters to us, what we want to tell the rest of the world, and then we have to find that hook somewhere on the internet and in social to do that, which Tyler's going to talk about here in a few seconds too. The other thing that we looked at as a model was Mike, which is a publication that is also a pretty hot startup. And one of the things that I love about Mike is they have a voice. They also have a perspective. They're very much they're a millennial publication. They have a social justice angle. We don't have the social justice angle, but we have a voice, and that's something that I feel like we haven't quite arrived there. That's one of the things that we're really wanting to cultivate, and that our new contributing editors, that's one of their assignments to help do that. And it's, again, I would welcome you to take a look at this publication. But they've grown phenomenally. And one of the issues of having a voice is that you can't talk in social without having a voice. You have to have an ownable, identifiable personality. And a lot of serious journalists, and we're all serious journalists, we struggle with bringing voice to our content. We're taught to have that very neutral sort of tone, and that frankly doesn't work in social. So for us, it's about having the guts to go there, and that's something that we're going to really be focusing on in the next iteration of what we're doing. The other thing that's been a challenge for us is having diverse political views represented in our publication. And I think where we were most successful with that is not so much in folks who were contributing for us, but in our photo project, which we called 100 Voices in 100 Days, which Nancy Andrews, a photojournalist who is working with us, did this really beautiful work. But one of the things that we discovered, not discovered, we all know this, but having that very direct engagement with the people of Appalachia, that helps bridge those political and cultural divides in a way that op-eds aren't going to do. So this is something that we really want to continue as well. They're in the publication. Their voices are in the publication. They're part of that speaking outward. And I think they were also really excited at the idea that, again, instead of being the subject, they would be creators of content, that their voice would be represented speaking outward. One of the things that you saw earlier in some of our sessions where we're looking at, we want to cross political, cultural divides. We're looking for new ways to create conversation. We do not moderate the conversations on our social. They've been pretty robust, and we've been excited to see that we do have people talking to each other, and not just within the region. We have people outside the region talking to people in the region, and to us, that's a really exciting sort of success story for what we want to see. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about, this was a strategy that we had that we borrowed from Quartz. Thomas recommended it when we were first talking about how do we target an audience. He said, target media as your audience. Talk to other journalists. They'll be excited about what you're doing. So we did that, and we beat the bushes and talked to everybody that we knew who knew somebody. But that really paid off. And we had the news director for Snapchat was excited about what we're doing. Folks at ProPublica, journalists around the world, people at Washington Post, and so that helps extend that audience for us, which is where we want to go. So that's all I want to talk about because we have a lot of people and I want everybody to have a chance to talk. And let me just sort of introduce people real quick. So we've got Tyler Channel, who's going to talk about analytics and what he's done with the brand. Lindsay, who has created Lena, who has one of our graduate students, now graduated, but who headed up a newsletter for us, and she's going to talk about how brands can do that to reach segmented, targeted audiences. Jeffrey, you heard from him earlier. He also did a really fantastic app, Talk of the Town Hall, that we're open sourcing to any media in the region who want to use it. So he'll describe that, and then Dave Nistich will tell you about the terrors and horrors of being the sole staff of a startup. So, all right, I'll hand it over to you.
All right.
Do you want the stand?
Sure.
All right.
All right. So my primary role on this project has been sort of the web development side of things, making sure the website's up, the web hosting, the domain, all that stuff. And also kind of tracking the analytics to see who's looking at the site, where they're coming from, how long they're staying, and how we can improve that. So page views on our site right now, we're a little over 125,000, and you're looking at about a 6-month total for that. I don't think it's a surprise that 74% of our traffic is mobile, mainly because most of it is from Facebook, from Twitter, and we've not even really tried to target any of these countries that are listed here: Germany, Canada, the UK, and Australia. But those are some countries that seem to visit the site most often. As far as Facebook goes, obviously you're going to have a lot more traffic there. We're looking, our impressions are at over 750,000. And something that I would like to improve on this site, or our whole initiative, is engagement. You see the engagement is much lower than the actual impression amount on Facebook. And I think what you do to fix that is to not really focus on your website, not focusing on your desktop website, focus on the mobile traffic, focus on what people are viewing. And for us, I think it's moving to Facebook Instant Articles. I know someone talked about that earlier, Google AMP, some of these other platforms. And since most of our traffic is social and mobile, we're moving to that. We're moving to Facebook Instant Articles, where most of our traffic is coming from those sources. And we're also in the process of applying for Apple News, if anyone uses Apple News. Has anyone heard of Facebook Instant Articles? I hope, no? Some of you? Yeah, so essentially it's a way to deliver your content quicker, faster to your audience. And Facebook hosts this content natively on their platform. And you can still track the analytics, you can still track everything, because the first thing I thought, well, we're driving traffic to Facebook, we're not driving traffic to our website, so what's the benefit? Why are we doing this? And let me stay right here for a second. And what we've found is that people stay on your site a lot longer. They're reading the content, it seems like, based on the numbers. And just kind of how this works, you post your story, whether it's in WordPress or whatever platform that you're working in. Facebook kind of grabs this from the RSS feed, and then your story becomes an instant article. So that's kind of the workflow with Facebook Instant Articles. And this is kind of what it looks like. You can look at the little lightning bolt. If you see stories on Facebook, that means they're a Facebook Instant Article. So if we look at that on the left-hand side, you can see there's like a little lightning bolt, and that sort of lets you know that that is a Facebook Instant article. And again, you can still track your analytics, and for people like Huffington Post or bigger news organizations, they're wanting to cash in on this. You know, you're not going to do this for free, send all your traffic to Facebook. So Facebook lets you keep whatever ads that you sell on your Facebook Instant article. So they're not taking any of that revenue. And Facebook, obviously, they've got a reason that they're doing this. One, they're trying to keep people on their platform, but also any ads that you define on the Facebook Instant article, they're going to give you 30% of that. So there's a reason that they're interested in doing this. Yeah, so is Facebook king of journalism? I don't know about that, but they're at least interested in keeping their users on their platform, and journalists are interested in keeping people reading their content, right? So, and these are some media outlets that are using it. Huffington Post. They only use this on mobile. So if you've ever looked at Huffington Post on Facebook, you will only get an instant article. Washington Post, Fox, BuzzFeed, all of these are using Facebook Instant articles. So we've only had instant articles for like 3 weeks or so. It's not been very long. But within a span of 3 weeks, it's become our #1 traffic source to our website. So it's like everyone is looking at things through this. And it's increased 32% the amount of time that people are actually spending on our website. So this is very, very, infant. We'll see how it goes, but this is something we're trying to focus on. We're trying to focus on where our audience is coming from, and Facebook Instant Articles is a way that we're doing that. Do you want to go next?
Yeah. Sorry? Oh, perfect. Thank you. Is this,
You're on the dot.
perfect. I'm doing it right now, but. Alright. How do I make that? All right, so how are we going to do this? Interesting. Okay, we'll get to this in a second. So I'm Lena, and I also worked with one other student editor for our weekly newsletter, Caitlin Davis, and we really hit the ground running, just like you said, with a startup. I've never been part of anything like this before, so it was a lot of trial and error, but we certainly took each lesson and applied it as we moved forward. So basically, we worked with one class. I believe it was Journalism 319, which is a copy editing course. And the students were put into 6 groups and assigned beats. And so each week on Wednesday, we would meet with each group, and they had 5 top stories that they had found. And from those 5 top stories, Caitlin and I would choose 2 to include in the newsletter under each beat. But before I get to that part, there are a few different newsletters that we started looking into when we were trying to figure out how we wanted to present all of these articles. And so the Skim is one of the main ones. To find out the best way to do this, we were interviewing in the fall state lawmakers and leaders, people that were really influential. We wanted to know how they got their major news, and a lot of that came from newsletters. So someone had mentioned the Skim, I believe, was one of the delegates, and the Skim is aimed towards millennials. It has a very millennial voice, and this is from the day after the election. Donald Trump is the next president of the United States of America. How the F did this happen? So I remember reading that moment and coming to our meeting with Nancy and Dave, and all just kind of knowing without saying it that we knew what had to be done. We at least knew where our project was going at that point. So that was kind of led by example, how we wanted to set it up, just kind of having headlines, different beats, and This one is, this is still the skim. So I don't know if you're familiar with WTF, just happened today. But it really just sums up all the major things that happen each day. And there's obviously so many things coming at us that this points out the major news and what's most important for the public. So, and again, with the, that was courts, sorry about that. But with the different beats, it really allows the readers to go and find what they want within the newsletter as well, and we found that to be very important. So this was our final newsletter that we put out in the semester. We ended up having an introduction for the entire newsletter, which highlighted all the stories, or at least we tried to highlight all of the stories, so people could do just that, find it within the newsletter and narrow that down. So I think for Caitlin and I, it definitely, being student editors in a startup allowed us to really understand how a publication works and how you can reach your audience in several ways. And we really made it a priority to, with our newsletter, keep a millennial voice. And it definitely added an aspect to the publication, which I think, while this is all very obviously everything is so serious and we want to talk about it, we wanted to present that in a way that millennials like us could appreciate it too. So I think.
And the open rate, we use MailChimp. You can speak to that.
Yeah.
Do you have those numbers on MailChimp?
Don't have.
But yeah, so go ahead. What were you going to say?
It's like 2.5 times the rate of the industry
Oh yeah,
standard.
I don't.
Yeah.
Dave might have.
It's like 2.5 times like the open rates and click rates are like 2.5 times like the industry standard. So.
And I wanted to mention, I actually know this from some of what we've talked with some of our readers, that interest in the UK and Germany is because of the similarities between what's happening here and Brexit. So it's really, that's part of what's bringing that European audience to. Okay, go ahead.
Nope, still not yet. Oh, there we go.
Probably have the coder set up on your.
Yeah. Come on. Do you mind? I can't seem to, that first tab.
Coders use a different trackpad than your average.
Sure. But for that first tab.
It's already on that first tab. Yeah, there you go.
This is what I wanted. I got it now. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that I did for 100 days that is putting into practice some of the concepts I talked about this morning, which is building a data set completely from scratch from sort of sources that are already digital sources, text sources that are already at hand. And it's a database of town hall meetings held by members of Congress who have districts that are in, or part of their district is in Appalachia. And a big part of, I chose this topic for a number of reasons. One big one was that it was something that I could do remotely from Chicago that felt appropriate to the region. I think that in many ways this publication is a response to parachute journalism. So I wanted to make sure that at doing a data journalism project about a place where I wasn't intimately familiar, I wanted to do something where there was very little danger that I would misrepresent it. And essentially I'm using a lot of technology to count things. So that felt very appropriate, and it was something I could do remotely. Another thing is that it was at the time that I pitched it, it was a pretty hot topic. A number of organizations were employing attending or pushing their representatives to hold town hall meetings as a strategy to try to push for a more progressive agenda in a region where there were a lot of conservative politicians. And this was sort of a flip of what had happened during the Obama administration, where conservative groups were using the same strategy to try to resist progressive policies. So it was an interesting political thing. And finally, it felt like a right-sized project. It was a data set I knew I could build mostly myself in a relatively short amount of time, and where I could use incremental advances in technology to help me make that happen. So the way that I did this is starting like you would start pretty much any reporting project. I called a bunch of people. I called every representative who was in Appalachia, and to make it easier to do this, I built this little application that I talked about a little bit this morning. What it did is it used a Google API to give me the contact information so I wouldn't have to look it up separately, and gave me a place to enter the responses from the representatives. Not only did that provide the initial meetings for representatives that had scheduled ones recently or had some coming up, I actually got the details that would go into the database. For the ones who didn't have it scheduled, I asked them what was the best way that they would recommend for their constituents to find out about these meetings. And this is not only like a question whose answer I see as service journalism, it also provided targets for pointing technology to try to automate the process of gathering this. So they told me social media, they told me their e-newsletters, so those are both things that I set as targets to automate the ingestion of data about meetings. The final product was a news application that provided a timeline sort of keyed against the days of the administration, showing all the public meetings that the representatives had held, and you can search for a particular address to find the representative and show just their meetings and a little bit of context for how many meetings they held relative to other reps, whether they held more telephone or in-person meetings, and sort of the context of their political party. On the way to building this app, I made a couple of other open source pieces of software. One of them is a simple library called Appalachia. Doing data journalism, sometimes you do really sophisticated coding things. Sometimes you just need to step through all the things that are part of another thing. In all the work I've done, whether it's in Chicago or this project, you wouldn't believe how many times I just needed a list of counties in a certain place. And so this is a GeoJSON file that anybody is welcome to reuse to make topical maps, as well as a simple JavaScript library to make it easier for your code to ask questions like, is this place in Appalachia? I also built a database to do my data entry as I got information about meetings from different sources. I could have an easy interface to track them and to add them. This is also open source, and even though it's geared towards members of Congress, I tried to write it as in an abstract way so that you could use it to track public meetings by other kinds of officials. For instance, in Chicago, there's a lot of debate over the use of public school buildings for schools that have been closed, and so you could use the same app to track whether whether officials in those areas are or are not meeting with constituents to decide what to do with those buildings. I built a scraper for ProPublica's Represent system. They publish congressional statements, but they don't make it easy to break out just officials in certain areas. especially when it's a region that spans many states. So I wrote a scraper to bring that information into my system. Since then, they have done some really amazing work on their API, so you can get that information without a scraper. And those just manifested themselves as little utilities that I could use to more quickly filter and review the information on that site you were just looking at. Finally, I wrote a tweet streamer. You can use Twitter's API to suck in tweets from a certain number of accounts historically, but that will not return every tweet. So I wanted to have a way to capture that in real time, not only to make sure I had the most complete data set, but also because maybe in the future it would be useful to do real-time alerting based on that in some way. So I was curious, one of the questions that wasn't presented in the app, but that I was curious about is, did holding these meetings matter? This is a scatter plot where the x-axis is the number of meetings held by officials, and the y-axis is the percentage that these representatives voted with their party. And so what you can see is that actually whether representatives met with their constituents in a public way that allowed for some clash, a lot or very little, didn't seem to make them more likely to be less partisan. So you have this representative who is from Kentucky, who held no public meetings during the Trump administration so far, who is the least partisan voter in Appalachia, whereas you have these other two. This is Representative Comer, I believe, whose attempt to have a town hall meeting in every part of his constituency was documented recently in the Washington Post. They're holding lots. This representative and another are holding lots of meetings, but are vote with their party at about the average rate. There's a couple of questions that I have from the data that I'm interested in pursuing, and those are things like, are newer representatives more likely to hold more meetings? Are representatives having the same number of public meetings as they did during the Obama administration? Are there maybe longer-term ways in which it affects their voting? And there's a few technical advances that I'd like to add to my data flow. Most importantly would be using a technology called entity extraction. And if you use Gmail, you might notice this now. Like date and time information will be underlined. If you click it, you can automatically create a calendar event. So I'd like to use the sort of underlying computer science that makes that happen to automatically create, or at least more quickly create the entries for these meetings in my database from things like emails or tweets or congressional newsletters. And finally, I'm interested in exploring a chat interface to the database instead of that timeline that you saw earlier, because that could also be an interesting way to both do the search for the user and also to collect information about meetings, whether it's reactions if they were someone who attended them, or meetings that didn't come through the channels that I've been watching, in a way that would feel more human than sort of submitting a form. So that's sort of all the moving parts of the project and the things I'm interested in the future.
All right. So thanks, Jeff. I don't really need a computer for this. I guess I can put.
So you're not distracted.
Well, let me pull up one thing here. Get back here a couple weeks. So Dana wanted me to talk about the trials and tribulations of doing this whole project and making a startup and doing this with a really small staff. And I want to point out that whenever we first started 100 Days in Appalachia, let me get back to where I was looking for here. Here it is. So I thought this was a great metaphor. On Trump's 100th day in office, which was April 29th, Joel Beeson, a photography, multimedia professor here at WVU's Media College, and also Dana's husband, and I took off for Pikeville, Kentucky. And if you guys are familiar with that weekend, and if you're not, a coalition of white supremacist groups, not just one group, multiple white supremacist groups, had planned this rally in Pikeville, Kentucky, and we went down. And as Joe and I got together at like 1 a.m, the morning of, I guess, this planned rally, we looked at each other and basically determined that we were both crazy people for showing up there in this situation. At the time, the city had banned hoods and masks, citing threats of violence on social media from the counter-protesters, a group called Antifa. And the whole town was basically telling people to get the hell out. And here we were showing up for all this. And so it was sort of the culmination of this entire 100 days. I mean, this was literally day 100 of this project, day 100 of Trump's presidency. And, here we were doing all this. And it was dangerous. It was crazy to be there. But I think it was confusing and chaotic. And I think, honestly, like, whenever I think about it, just the environment that was going on there, just the uncertainty of everything that could have happened served as, like, a really great metaphor of the 100 days. One of the things to point out with all this is, after News Story, we started talking amongst ourselves between West Virginia Public Broadcasting and WVU and the Daily Yonder about how this thing would come together. And I think that was as early as like June, July. They brought me on to start this project in September, and I had to get through an election cycle. So I had to work my old job, at Public Broadcasting and get through the election. So I was driving to Morgantown 2-3 days a week, coming back to Charleston to work my job at Public Broadcasting and sort of transitioning into this role. And I think at the time, I could be wrong about this, Marion, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that they were looking to launch this whole thing in May. Yeah. And then the election happened, right? So literally, it was, I was sort of given, from the time that I had really gotten in the seat to do this, like 6 months to get this whole thing off the ground, which turned into like 4 weeks, right? Yeah. So it was, that in and of itself was kind of a challenge. And the other thing too, and I don't mean this in a bad way at all, in the least bit, but you've got a collaboration amongst a bunch of different organizations who have different cultures. And so whenever you are sort of finding yourself in the mix of all these things and you have a historical sort of presence in one environment, and then you find yourself in a different environment with different people and different workflows, it's kind of overwhelming. And you're constantly adapting. You're constantly learning people's work habits and their workflows. And another huge challenge with all this, too, is working even with the staff that I'm familiar with. Jesse can sort of contest to this fact, is even reaching people that you've spent a lot of time reaching, you're in a different workflow, you're doing a different thing than what you're used to. So even going back and working with people that you're ultimately very familiar with is a challenge, which seems like it shouldn't be, but you're constantly adapting in this whole thing. Another thing I wanted to point out too is, and I'm sure Dana will echo this as well, is, when January 20th happened in the inauguration, things went batshit crazy immediately. I'm sure you guys all paid attention to that first week of the Trump administration. I felt like we were tripping over ourselves to even make sense of what was happening in America at that point. And to be honest, I think there was a lot of feeling that way the whole way through. And as journalists and as citizens of this country, I think that being a journalist isn't unique in that experience for this administration and everything that's happened. It was just so busy, and everything that happened was so unexpected in so many ways that we were trying to figure out how to navigate this as people and as journalists, and just sort of circle back around to the Pikeville thing and finish up. One of the things that, sort of principle of journalism is this idea of objectivity, and, I would say that I don't believe in that. I believe in being fair to people. And if they do something wrong, you got to treat them fair. If they do something right, you got to treat them fair. But like being objective in a situation like this, originally at Pikeville, I wrote one piece that was just straight reporting, very facts-oriented sort of situation. And then I took off on vacation. I disappeared. I went off the grid for like a week and went trout fishing up in the mountains. And then came back, and the whole time I was up there, and whenever I came back to civilization, all this stuff was stewing in my head about like how crazy this experience was. And so I went back and wrote a piece that was essentially 5 times the length of my originally reported piece. And this is just sort of first-person experience on trying to get your head around being in this environment and trying to navigate this really wacky situation. And to explain that when a white supremacist rally happens in a downtown Pikeville, Kentucky, there's a lot of things happening at the hotel and at dinner and all the different things that you don't think about whenever you read a news story. And so I felt it was necessary to not only do that, but to, and again, I get back to my point in saying that, you know, there's objectivity is sort of impossible as journalists, but I think that racism and bigotry are objectively wrong. And I think that if we can start there in trying to have a conversation moving forward about addressing those issues as journalists, as citizens, then we can really start to engage ourselves and work to solutions. And I don't know that we'll get past this anytime soon, but we certainly need to address it. And that was sort of my starting point with all this. So there you go.
One of the things that, to wrap up, and I don't know how much time we have, I haven't been doing my timekeeping, but we wanted to engage this audience in helping us think about, you know, what is the media missing? Remember, we're trying to talk to a national audience. What do we need to be telling them that they don't know, and what are the stories that we're missing? And of course, who are the collaborators in this room that we're not working with yet, that we want to work with?
Right, and you can pitch us. If you have a story, I want to know about it. If you go to 100daysinAppalachia.com, there's a button up at the top that says Submit. And if you click that, it's a call for pitches, and it's got a Google form, and I look at that thing every morning. So if you've got a story idea, we will pay you for it if we approve it. But it goes into a Google spreadsheet, and I am in touch with every single person that, you know, reaches out to me.
And if you're a regional media organization and you want to share content, we will link back to you. And if it's the right piece, or if it's a piece that you're trying to amplify and reach an external audience for.
That was it.
Yeah. Oh, we're looking at me. All right. Glynis has a. Who's got a microphone? Thanks, Nicole.
I've been really enjoying the 100 days stuff. I think it's great. I think a lot of times the national media and the local media, though, is really focused on this idea of the divide, which you talk about at the beginning. And recently in my personal experiences, what I've realized is that we are a lot more alike than we are not alike. And so I would just encourage more stories about that. I would like to see, you know, us exemplifying a little bit, or at least finding that, because I think it's obvious and I think it's everywhere, but we're always looking for conflict and we're always looking for the problem. And I think that in doing that, sometimes we create problems. So I'm not sure exactly how I feel 100% about solutions journalism, but I do think that there are a lot of stories to be told about people finding common ground. And personally, I'm really interested in that subject. So just wanted to throw it out there.
Awesome. Thank you, Glynis. Anyone else have a question? Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, you mentioned that how much of this was, like, in response to what you saw national media doing and how they were covering the region? Like, what are you trying to do that you don't see national media doing with the region? What is, like, the kind of space that you're hoping to play in, and what are you offering that's unique that you don't see happening? Or what do you hope to offer that's unique that you don't see happening?
Sure, I'll start with that and let others join in. I think, yes, I mean, it was a direct response, honestly. We had spent an entire year reading about West Virginia in The Guardian, the BBC, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, the New Yorker, and it was kind of getting old. And so it's interesting because the original project we want to do really was sort of a solutions journalism. Let's present a different face of the region to the world. And this is still partly that. But because we have the prism of politics, we've decided, I mean, we're staying with that because at the essence, some of the problems in West Virginia and the solutions in West Virginia and the opportunities in West Virginia, they're political. So we're sticking with that because it also gives us that wider audience. As to, I mean, I still think we're finding our way to some of the work that we want to do. We want to do more original reporting. We want to produce credible counter-narratives about the region for the rest of the world. I was really pleased when WNYC came to us to talk about, the region in regards to the election. And it's like, we've only existed for, like, at that point, 30 days, but they already saw us as a vehicle for expertise about that. And I would way prefer that that's happening because obviously we're engaging with all the media and experts and voices in the state in that process. And so that's part of what we're hoping to do. I mean, I would love it if the BBC was, checking in with us and we could say, who you need to really talk to? And I think early on there was a story that was done. And I remember Dave said, this is bullshit. I was there reporting on this, and then we read the story. I don't remember which one it was. They were talking about some response to Trump and some community. And you're, You're like,
I can't remember what that was specifically. I think it was like down in Buchanan or something.
And, they may have talked to one person who said that, then that became the story about the region. And Dave was like, no, I talked to 20 people who didn't feel that way at all. There was another story there, and that wasn't told. So that we want to fill that gap.
Any other questions while we have these?
I think, and just to add on what she was saying to answer Catherine's question, I mean, one of the things I think that what we've aimed to do is and Dana and I have talked about this endlessly, is like, we're not a paper of record. We're not the New York Times. We're not the Washington Post. We're not the Charleston Gazette Mail. Those media outlets have a place in the world, and they exist for a reason. And I think one of the things that we've wanted to do, and that I want to do more and more of, is that I want to incorporate more data into our stories. I want to incorporate more things like what Jeff's doing with interactives and news apps. And I think that's, if you look around West Virginia, truly, there are very limited spaces where that's happening. And I think that doing that kind of journalism and doing it well is what 100 Days wants to amplify and be a part of. So it's just another way of telling stories, but I want to own that side of it too. So
I think when we get into the machine like this, maybe for people out there and me who are consumers of news and maybe aren't professional journalists but are aware of the news, it's no joke. The battle that they are fighting to tell local stories from local perspectives is for real. And I'll give you 3 examples. For whatever reason, the West Virginia Community Development Hub became a contact on the phone lists of like reporters at New York Times and BBC and Reuters. They would call me looking for, and I can't tell you. So the first one I had that made me think, we need an alternative, was a film company working for BBC in London who called me looking for, I'm looking for like a family in a trailer park. Like real, right. And I'm like, whoa. No, not the stereotypes. And I'm like, oh, right, you're in London still, aren't you? You haven't come here to actually try and meet new people. And then the other thing that happened constantly was New York Times, Reuters, AP, all called me looking for exactly the same person. We want the sibling or the son of a coal miner who is from southern West Virginia, who is a Republican but doesn't think coal's coming back. Do you know someone? Right?
Can I piggyback off that really quickly? And one of the big things that I want to show off about 100 Days is this piece right here that we built its own subdomain for. It's called Patriot Coal and American Bankruptcy. And so it's the story about that centers around this fight for retired union miner benefits that took place actually that same weekend of April 29th, was right around the deadline of that too. It was a master's student at the Columbia University's journalism school. Daniel Flatley, he's originally from Wheeling. So when this came out, and sure, it is about coal in some ways, but really it's a bigger story. But Dana and I kept talking about this and to sort of prove your point, when this came out, there was a big conversation about, coal miners. We can't make coal miners pay for PBS. I should mention that I work for the state's public broadcasting station. And there was seemingly everywhere the coal miner was in American conversation. It defined the white working class or whatever they were trying to say. And we wrote in here, I wrote a foreword about, while they may be everywhere in media, there's not as many coal miners as one might think. And the reasons why we're having this conversation about American bankruptcy and Patriot Coal and fight over union benefits has nothing to do with the fact that it's a coal company. It just happens to be the backdrop to a story that's a much bigger conversation. So, yeah.
And so I again, as someone who's really invested in the narrative of West Virginia, this is critical. If this doesn't happen, the dominant, very unthought out narrative from the rest of the country about what's happening here, there's no challenge to it. This is really, really critical work, and so on behalf of me, thank you. But on kind of a challenge, just to move on to the next session, I'm a small newspaper guy. I ran small newspapers for years, and it was during the time when people were talking about the death of newspapers, right? Oh, newspapers are dying, journalists are dying. Oh, why do you think that? Like, I think that there's heaps of good journalists. Oh, no, newspapers are dying. My grandfather used to sit every morning and read the newspaper from cover to cover. That doesn't happen anymore. You know what that person's morning? Their grandfather took half an hour in the morning to read the news, right? The papers are still there. In fact, they're more accessible than ever. So my challenge to you is that if you're not a journalist or a media creator, your obligation is to read the news, watch the news, just take 10 minutes to pay attention, right? Because it is out there and it's troubling me. I have friends that are like, I just don't even pay attention anymore. It's like, well, where does that get us? So the content is out there. Just please try and grab it whenever you can. Jesse, did you want to say something?
Before I don't know how close you are to wrapping up, but just a couple observations about this project. I am neck deep in it in a way. Dave is still sort of my employee, and we partner with content and whatnot. But I get to be an observer of this project from afar, warts and all. And I think one of the really cool things about it, being housed at an educational institution, is that it's almost open source in a way, that it's very transparent. These guys will tell you exactly what they're doing on any given day. There isn't a competitive aspect either. We're not trying to beat anyone to anything, just trying to get it right. And because of that dialogue, I think that it's a great way for people within West Virginia to engage with the source that has a national outlet. Part of what I try and do at West Virginia Public Broadcasting is have that same dialogue, but our audience is statewide. It's regional. It's not national. So in that aspect, it's experimental. You guys are teaching a whole new generation of kids, young journalism students, a new way of doing things, and also that it's possible to do this sort of thing on a very limited, I don't know.
Almost non-existent.
Yeah. I mean, it's right. When I looked at the resources, I often bemoan my own resources, and I'm constantly amazed at what we managed to put out given the number of people we have in it. They have way less than that, and they're doing much more. And yet Dave will still take the time to respond to everyone who gets into that and submits a form. So, not to sort of pat anyone's back, but I think it's a phenomenal thing to see and to have that much energy involved in it. It's fantastic. So I encourage everyone to engage with the project as much as possible. It'll only make it better.
Yeah, and to do that, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Appalachia 100. Shameless plug, shameless plug, shameless plug.
Yeah, it only works if you guys are going to pitch in, right? Wives of coal miners. I was down in eastern Kentucky, and 5 women in separate occasions. One thing's about wives of coal miners. If they could just give them like $1 an hour raise, it would transform the southern economy. It's worth looking into.
I have one more thing to say really quick.
Yes.
Just going back to the potential for this project, I think what makes us unique is our ability to tap into authentic stories and tell those stories as authentically as possible, because we're here and we are not coming in from New York or DC. You know, we're in Appalachia, and we're able to connect and be authentic in a way that a reporter from New York could have the potential to connect in that manner. But we're with these people. We are Appalachia, and I think that's what makes us unique moving forward.
Nice. Right. Beautiful. So, free beer is what I have to say to you in a minute. Just give it a second, right? Oh, Lindsay is the woman between you and free beer, but I promise you it's good. So in a minute, Lindsay Gilpin is a remarkable young writer and reporter covering the region who, on the heels of this, we want to just talk to you a little bit about if you don't work for a dominant newsroom, or you're not, a staffer or a freelancer, what are the other things you can do to get your story out there if you've got great things to say? I know there's a lot of freelancers here and people doing DIY journalism. So Lindsay, we're going to have Lindsay talk for about 20 minutes. The food trucks are on their way, so please be hungry. They'll be out the door and to the left, Cody Thrasher's Hash Browns and Newgrounds and My Little Cupcake. And then at about 4:15, it's going to be a photo exhibition just here on the video wall. Christian Thacker and a bunch of amazing photographers from around the region have done some photos just for News Story, and it's going to be on that ginormous wall there just around the corner. And then upstairs, free beer sponsored by Chestnut Brew Works and Short Story, which is just amazing. Don't guzzle it, be polite. It won't run out. Well, it will run out, but everyone be calm. So just hang around here and Lindsay will get started in 5 minutes or so. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.